Alright, well, there hasn't been any traffic lately, so let's start the video and all the vehicles will decide to drive by. So, sorry, good timing. Yeah, she likes to follow the chickens around and eat their poop, and she thinks it's funny to mess with them. So far, so she's a pretty young puppy. She's not even a year yet, but so far we haven't had an issue with her actually, like, going after them, and usually I won't let her chase them, like, around, right? I'll usually yell at her so she's not getting into the habit of it. But anyways, chickens are in here. So these are cottonwoods I cut down yesterday. This is from like a cedar that was at my dad's house that he cut down. He brought this up. Also looks like there's some sort of colored thing right there. I don't know what that is. Kids bouncy ball maybe? What is this? Right there in the middle. Oh, come on, focus. I don't know what that is. Anyways, I have to go figure that out later. But yeah, so figured I'd show this off for a sec, and go to the goats just for fun. So the goats are actually back here. This is more stuff I cut down. So I cut all this down yesterday. More Russian olives. There's some cottonwoods back there, and as you can see, the goats love it. They just, I mean, it's super overfilled right now. I usually don't cut down this much at one time. Just feeling froggy yesterday, and started cutting stuff down like crazy, and here comes the traffic. But like I said, I cut all this stuff down, and actually here comes this one here. He looks like he's wearing a bow. His horns grew just enough this spring that he can get through the fence like he always has, but then he can't get back out. His horns have grown just enough, so I actually duct taped with red duct tape so it looks like a bow behind his horns. I had it duct taped in front of his horns, and he kept ripping it off and snagging it on stuff, and it's been duct taped behind his horns for well over a week now. So yeah, if you have a goat where you're having problems with him getting his head stuck in the fence, going behind the horns seems to be the key, because I haven't had to deal with it at all. So they're gonna come over thinking I got snacks. But anyways, so yeah, the goats will just eat all this stuff. And then the chickens, like I said, whenever I'm home, I let the chickens out. Otherwise I keep them in their run. But yeah, they go in and they wander around through all this, pick through everything, and they're currently picking through the goats' minerals. Dinks. But anyways, yeah, so I'll go through all this once the goats are kind of finished with it, and the bigger stuff will actually get put in a pile to burn in the fireplace during the winter, and then the smaller stuff will be for a fire pit, you know, in the yard, or yeah, if the kids just want to start a fire because they're bored, whatever. And then at the end of the year, like, you know, first of next spring, I'll actually go ahead and burn all the extra stuff. So anyways, yeah, just figured we'd start it off with some fun, entertaining animal things before I just get rambling on about other things. But anyways, it's June 2nd, and yeah, we're working on the project of the day, and figured I'd do a video real quick before I finish this up. But so this house, when we bought it, has a water well drilled right there. This is actually tied into the city water, and it's the antifreeze, or won't freeze, right? The non-freeze. Antifreeze is, yeah, sounds wrong, but right, it won't freeze up. It'll actually drain back out, so it won't freeze in the winter. But the water well itself had, we were told it was 220 feet deep and had water pretty close to the surface. Well, I've been wanting to do something with it for a while, and I just haven't got around to it. And today at work, just decided I wanted to get it done. So I got off a little early. So I decided to just jump on it today instead of work on it this weekend. But so here's the pump in my test bucket. But when I first moved in, the pump was laying right there in the dirt, and all the wiring was just wrapped around this. And then there was a junction box that was disconnected and just laying there in the dirt, and no cover, and no clue what was going on. Anyways, and then I had a bunch of poly that my dad had been given at a place me and him worked a while ago, and he didn't need, I mean, I have a ton of it, and he didn't need it, so I ended up with it. So I wheeled the poly out, and there's poly. I mean, it starts over here at the pump, runs over, I've got a bunch here, goes behind the truck, it actually runs clear over towards my work truck, and then it's clear down off the hill. And it's 340 feet of poly, 345 feet of poly, roughly. I walked it out with a little wheel measuring tool that we have at work, and then I started feeding it down the well. And about 100 feet deep is where I actually hit water, like heard water. And I had all but about 80 feet of it when it kind of seemed to bottom out. So, I mean, that puts me around that 260 mark. Granted, there was no pump on the end at that point. It was just the poly, so it could have been spooled up, you know, no tension. So 220 to 260, I mean, that seems pretty close, but the water's definitely deeper than I was hoping and what we had been told they thought it was, which kind of sucked, because at work, again, I just decided I was going to do something, and my thought was, well, I'll go figure out how low the water is, and I'll do a surface pump or a hand pump or something, right? I will figure out some way to get water other than from the city, so I'm not getting charged by the city all the time from a spout sitting next to a water well. So did that, found out it was pretty deep, deeper than I wanted to try to do a hand pump or a surface pump. So I pulled the pump out, and I ran all the wiring out so I could look through the wiring, try and figure out what's going on, hooked up the junction box, plugged it in. Now, it is one of those 30 amp 250 volt outlets, so if you're staring at the prongs, right, it's got 3 prongs. Bottom one's round, your left one's vertical, your right one is horizontal, which is not, right, like, yeah, it's just not super common. Like, my generator doesn't have that hookup, and I only have one place at the whole house that has that hookup, and that is right there. Right there. Anyways, so, all right, that's apparently where they were hooking up the pump to begin with, but I plugged it in, walked over, and I just didn't seem to have any power at the pump. Like, it wasn't moving, it barely made any noise. And then as I was walking back over there, the dog walked by and kind of yipped and kind of looked at the wire like the puppy did, kind of yipped and looked at the wire like, what the heck, man? And so I ran over and unplugged it and walked over, and there was actually some cracking in the insulation of the wire. So I started flexing the wire, and I ended up cutting out over 20 feet of the wire to the junction box, and hooked it all back up again, totally guessing, no clue what I'm doing, and nothing happened. Didn't even have a tiny buzz. Switched it around, finally actually had, I mean, you could hear the pump trying to engage, but it wouldn't pump water. And I was like, man, that really sucks. Like, the pump is bad, right? But at least now I've got the wiring in the junction box figured out, so if I buy a new pump, anyways, started walking back towards the house, and all of a sudden started shooting water everywhere. And I had cleaned the pump out as much as I could by hand before I did that, but yeah, it must have just had enough buildup in there from sitting for years and years. We've been here over 2 years, and the guy we bought it from, my buddy, had been here, I want to say 7 years, or he'd owned it for 7 years. He'd been renting it most of that time, and it was never hooked up while he was here. But so my test bucket isn't very tall, barely enough for it to, like, when it's completely full, it pumps down in a matter of a few seconds. So it does pump. So I ran to town, I bought some bushings, bushing king nipple. I've wrapped over the hose clamps, I've wrapped the electrical right there, and then on the back side of this there's a little spot to hook something up to, like, hold this, right? And I don't know how well you can see that, but there's just a slot through the body and out the top. I went and bought 300 feet of 550 paracord. I don't know. We're gonna try it. So my thought is, not having PVC, I don't need a crane. I don't need my tractor to work, because my tractor is another project I got to work on and get running, but I don't have to do any of that. I have it's a hoist that we used in the oil field back in the day. Pretty much no one uses them anymore. It was given to me because they just don't use them anymore. Most of the mechanics trucks have cranes, but what it is, we'll walk over here, I'll show you real quick. It's got a little stand on this thing, and it's kind of over here in my pile of projects, but there's a stand down here that's kind of covered in weeds, and then there's this eyelet right here, and there's an eyelet up here. It's got a brace welded, and what it was you could hook a come along up, and you could actually lift. They were saltwater disposal pumps up with that, and then it swivels in the base, and you could swivel it and swing the pump out of the building, because they were usually in a covered building. That way you could lift it up, swing it out of the building, and set it down, and then take your other one out of, say, your truck bed, set it down next to it, lift it up, set it down. My thought is, I can take a pulley and a winch on my truck, which I'm selling my truck, but currently my truck has a winch, my Jeep has a winch, or even a four-wheeler, just whatever, anything like that, and I can run the paracord through just a small pulley, so it's coming up, and then that way, as it's it's going to be pulling up, and then I can just kind of walk the poly out if I have someone helping me, and lift the pump out, right? I mean, I could do it by hand like I have today, but this way, this should be easier to get the pump in and out. And I've took the 300 feet of paracord, and I've tied a knot every 25 feet or so, or a loop every 25 feet or so, and that way, that loop, what I'm going to do is I'm going to weld a hook onto that where they've got that brace in the corner of that lifting, I don't even know what you call it, like I keep wanting to say hoist, which I guess it's a hoist assembly. Yeah, it's a hoist missing the hoisting unit, but point being, I'm going to hang a hook right there, weld a hook in there, and that way I can just hook my loop, like if I'm using a winch or a four-wheeler or whatever, I can hook that up. If I'm doing it by hand, when I get to the next loop, I can hang it up, take a break, and that way I can slowly lift this out by hand, with a truck, whatever, without needing a tractor, a backhoe. And yeah, hopefully this works. Hopefully I actually have water out of my well now. So I'm not going to really go over the electrical, because again, I kind of just guessed. This pump had 4 wires, only 3 were hooked up from the get-go, and I read up on a couple things. Like, I really wasn't planning on messing with this today, but I'd read up on some stuff before, and there were some guys that recommended 2-wire pumps, because then you don't have to have that little junction box. I don't know how true that is, and I also, this doesn't have a switch, right? There's no high fluid level switch at a tank. There's no high pressure switch, nothing. This is going to be, when I plug it in, it runs. If it seems to be pretty reliable, I think what I'm going to do is just build a water tank on a platform, or just set it uphill a little ways from my garden, and I will just run the pump into that, and then about halfway up that tank, I'm going to run some pipe out of it. And what I want to do eventually is actually build a stream, so I'll probably put the tank just up here somewhere, and I want to build a stream that runs right here along the road and actually runs down through the horse corrals, and it drops off, the horse corrals drop off pretty quick, and then it drops all the way off down to our pond. But my thought is, just have a steady, slow stream, and line it with like a pit liner or something, and rocks. We have millions of rocks, But that way it's just a steady stream through the horse corrals. They always have fresh water during, you know, the warmer part of the year, and but where it drops off the back of the property, I mean, there's just tons of trees and stuff back there. Again, I have so much clearing of trees I need to do, but I'd like to, you know, kind of work a path down through there and, yeah, plant herbs, pasture seed, alfalfa, berries, you know, raspberry plants, whatever. Just use that as, right, a backup irrigation for just plants, right? And again, let it go down towards our pond. And there's actually kind of a secondary pond, which it's kind of an overflow spot. That would be the better way to describe it, but it's stagnant. Once the water levels drop, it gets stagnant and it gets really nasty, and it gets really just lots of mosquitoes. And so the other thing is I'm hoping with that water working its way down the hill, and granted it's a long ways down there, so I don't know if this will actually work, but if it were to go all the way down to that overflow, maybe my water coming in will help keep that level high enough that it'll actually continue flowing, because it's an overflow for a pond that sits above the pond, if that makes sense. Like, right, it's not a lower overflow, right? It doesn't flow down and then that pond empties first. This is actually higher, and the overflow pipe sits really high, and so until it hits a certain point, it doesn't go anywhere, and so all the runoff and stuff hits it, drains off, and then that bottom 4 or 5 feet just sits there. So anyways, I'm gonna go ahead, start setting this pump in here, and see how lucky we get. Because again, this pump was ripped out, has been ripped out for a long time, and for all I know it's out because it won't actually lift the water 240 feet. There's only one way to find out, so I'm gonna shut up, get to it, boys.